Hi everyone, this is Tony from Tony Marie's Creations, and today I want to show you how to make a really quick card using our decorative mask. And if you're not familiar with what they are, they're in the current catalog, and we actually have a set of holiday masks as well that's in the current July through December mini catalog. So I want to show you a quick way that you can use it for making backgrounds for your cards. And I'm using the Plenty of Patterns decorative mask. Let me just show you what you get in that packet. There's actually 4 masks. Let me put that out of the way for a second. So you have one that's a lot of different angles. This one looks like little flowers. This one has 4 different designs that you can use, and the one I'm going to use for my card, I call it fish scales. I don't know if that's what it's called, but that's what it reminds me of. So we're going to use that one today for our card. We're going to be using blending brushes, or a blending brush for coloring, and so let me show you real quick what the finished card is going to look like. So this is going to be the finished card. We are also going to use the happiest of birthdays. And this is a really great set to have for all your birthday card needs. The one that I tend to use the most is this nice big stamp, because it's a nice focal point. You really don't have to do a whole lot when you're making your card other than stamp this and put a few embellishments on it, which is what I'm going to do for the card today. I'm also going to, just for accents, I'm going to be using these small stars out of the Angels of Peace stamp set, and the Angels of Peace is featured in our mini catalog, the July through December mini catalog. But I needed a few little stars, so I'm going to grab the stamp from that stamp set and get that mounted and have that ready to go. And the colors I'm using are Pacific Point, Daffodil Delight, and I'm using some of our Bumblebee gingham. I love gingham ribbon, and this is such a versatile ribbon too. It ties very nicely, so I'm going to be using some of that. And also going to pull in some bling from our Holiday Rhinestone Basic Jewels. And these are available in the annual catalog as well. So let me go ahead and get stuff out of the way so we can get started. And what I'm going to do first is I'm working, you can work just on your scrap paper. I mean, that will work fine. I'm actually working on just a piece of a Teflon sheet. You can get these at, I mean, basically any kind of a store in the kitchen area. It's Teflon baking sheets. And I just took one and cut it down into smaller pieces to make it easier to work with. So I'm going to grab a piece of Pacific Point. And this is cut at 4 inches by, I'm sorry, 4 and a quarter, or 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. This is going to go on top of my real red cardstock base. So there's our base. It's your standard base, 11 by 4 1/4, and it's scored at 5 1/2. So I'm going to take the base and lay it on my work area here, and I'm going to put my mask over top of it. Now, the one thing you want to make sure of when you're using mask is you don't want to line the edge right up with the edge of your cardstock, because if you do, you're going to get that spacing up there, and you don't want that. You want a free-flowing design, so you're going to make sure your mask is a little above your starting point there. And then I'm going to grab just a couple of pieces of washi tape, any type of washi tape you have lying around, or painter's tape or masking tape is fine. I just want to be able to keep my mask in place while I'm working on the background design. So just a few little pieces here. Actually, let's make this lay down a little bit flatter because I can see a gap in it. So the idea is you want this to lay down flat. Okay. And then I'm going to bring in one of our blending brushes. If you've not tried the new blending brushes, I highly recommend them. They're really, really fantastic for doing shading, laying down a lot of color. Now, this is what it looks like before you apply the color to it. It's very dense. It looks like it's foam, but these are actually bristles, and they're very compact. So it does pick up a lot of ink, and it does help to help you spread that color. So what I've done is I kind of make one for each primary color group. So I have one for my blues, yellow, red, greens, purple, things like that. So I don't recommend that having one for every single color that we have, although if that's something you wanted to do, you could, but that's going to result in a lot of blending brushes. So the other thing I want to do, and I'm not sure if this is something that you might have seen someplace else, it's just a little trick for applying color. Now, there's several ways you can do that. You can simply tap the brush on your ink pad. But what I find to be a little bit more efficient is to take one of our clear acrylic blocks and then just lay a little color on top of the block and let this be your palette. That way you don't have to keep altering the surface of the ink on the stamp pad, and you've got a just nice amount of ink over here that you can work with. So I'm going to lightly tap around on that little palette that I've just made. And again, you may see a lot of different ways of using the brush. So I've seen some demonstrators who say put your finger on the head of the brush. It gives you a little bit more control. I've seen others who say put your finger back here a little bit further down on the handle. I say do whatever feels comfortable to you. But what I'm going to start to do is off the edge. I don't want to start right on the actual cardstock, but sort of off the edge, I want to come in here and start applying some color. And it may be hard to see because I'm doing what I call a tone on tone. So Pacific Point ink on top of Pacific Point cardstock. And again, I'm going to come in from the outside and just start blending this color in. And because the sentiment is going to go pretty much in the center of this background, you don't have to do the whole surface. So I'm just going to focus on putting some color on the top, bottom, and around the sides of this. There's really no need to be using all that ink if you don't need to use it. Be a little frugal. I'm going to turn this a little bit so that I can then come in and work on this side. And again, if I were using our basic white cardstock, you would definitely see as I'm putting this color down. And I'm also seeing, which I think I put the tape the wrong place. I should have put the tape on the edges of the cardstock to hold it down a little bit better. As I saw it was slipping a little bit, but it was easy enough just to push the edges so that it was lined back up. Okay, so I've used a good amount of the ink that I had on my palette. Okay. And the other thing about blending is you want to have some light spots in it as well as dark. It doesn't have to be an even coverage of the ink. So I'm going to move this block out of the way so I don't put my hand in it, which is not unusual. And then I'm going to grab this washi tape. And pull that up, and then you'll see, let me move this piece out of the way as well. You'll see that I've got this subtle design around the outside edges of this Pacific Point cardstock. Okay, now if you wanted to go in and do a little bit more, like I was a little bit light in this area, you can lay the stencil back down or the mask back down and, you know, put a little bit more color on there. I'm not going to be too concerned about that because, as I said, this sentiment is going to cover that area. Okay. Oh, and I forgot the dies that I used for this, again, that I just had in my hand. I think they're the contour dies. Scallop contour dies. I'll get those out and show you which one I used. It's always the opposite side. So I used the second from the largest to cut out that piece for the sentiment. And what I like to do is, if I'm working with a card that's using this shape, I'll cut out, I don't know, half a dozen or more of these and just kind of stick them in a little clear envelope to have them to use for future cards. That way I don't have to pull the dies back out and always, you know, keep having to work harder instead of smarter. So now that I've got this part done, I can go ahead and apply this to my card front. And as I say, this particular card goes together really quickly. Initially, it was going to be a birthday card for my sister. And this card has a very, very narrow border. I just wanted a little bit of the red peeking out. My sister's birthday is July 4th. So that's why the color scheme is what it is. The red, white, the blue, red, blue, white, and yellow for the little stars we're going to do later. And I ended up giving her a different card that I made, but I used this for class and everyone really liked how quickly it came together. So the other thing I'm going to show you is something I do when I'm cutting out these shapes where there are dies, is I will take a larger piece of cardstock, and I don't want to move this because it's in the position that I need it to be in, but I'll take a larger piece of cardstock from a scrap piece of paper, just enough that you can have a border to either tape down or use your magnet to hold this down with the cutout, because now I can come in here and fit this in as a template. And I've already, because I still have this mounted from class, I already have this in place of where it needs to go. So if I didn't, what I would do is take my template out, my mask out, put my stamp face down in the opening of where it looks like it's centered, close the lid to my stamp apparatus, and press to apply the stamp to it. That way it's going to be stuck to the plate and it's going to be centered on where I need it to be. So now I'm going to go back, put this back in here. And another tip is when you're using the stamp apparatus, you can use our regular size stamp pads. I personally find that when I use the bigger pads, I tend to catch the edges of my stamps a lot more. So what I like to do is I use our mini spots. You can buy an assortment of these in the main catalog, and I don't remember if the Pacific Point happens to be in that color collection, but most of my stamping spots have come as part of my Paper Pumpkin subscription. So every month our Paper Pumpkin subscription is a project that gets mailed to you, And in each box, there's a set of stamps, and there's always a Stampin' Spot, and the color varies based on what the project is each month. So I save these, and I find that they're perfect size for inking up stamps on the Stamparatus. Another little tip I want to give you is that if you lay this down, it's kind of at an angle of where it's actually laying on my work surface. What I like to do is just grab an ink pad that might be sitting around my workspace, just to give me a little bit more of a platform. And then I just go in, and I've got better control over the ink when I'm using an ink spot. You can also purchase these ink spots blank. They are uninked. And I think there's, 6 maybe in a package. I should have that information in front of me, and I apologize that I don't. But you get the blank spots, and then you can buy our re-inkers and then make your own set of stamping spots for your projects. So that's another idea. If you don't subscribe to Paper Pumping and you want to start getting some of these little ink spots, that's a way you can do it. So now I've got that pretty well covered. I'm going to move my Stamparatus back into the camera view. Make sure this hasn't shimmied anywhere. And I'm going to just go ahead and press this. And when you have a bigger stamp, you want to make sure you're kind of catching the whole image. And it will stick to that sometimes. But I've got a perfectly centered sentiment on my stamped piece of cardstock. I love our Stamparatus. It is one of the best tools I think that we have. Okay, so now I wanted to add, as I said, some stars to this, because again, it was going to be my sister's birthday card, and with her birthday being July 4th, I thought it kind of looked like fireworks a little bit. So I just went and in some of the white space, I just came in and added a few of these stars. And again, remember, you can stamp off the edges. You don't want to contain all your stamped images within the lines. You know, they always tell you to color outside the lines. Well, we want you to stamp outside the lines. Okay, and that part is done. And now I'm going to add my bumblebee. And even though I use Daffodil Delight on this, it's still a very good color coordination with the bumblebee ribbon. You really can't tell the difference at all. Another tip I do for my card classes is I always hear how people are very nervous doing bows. Like, I can't do a bow, it never turns out right. It gets me frustrated. And the last thing I want to do when I'm doing my classes is to have frustrated stampers. So I do a two-step bow, and I'll cut a piece of ribbon this is actually a lot wider than I normally do, but you just want to have some hanging over either side. And the idea is you're going to wrap these loose ends around to the back of the card. So I do that and just kind of flip it over, hold that in place, and I'm going to put a piece of double-sided adhesive tape here on one side and one on the other. And that's going to hold those ends down. And then I'm going to take a shorter piece of ribbon and I'm going to slide it underneath. And then I'm just going to tie a simple knot. And I find this also helps when you're mailing your cards, that it doesn't have the bulk of a traditional type of a bow. So that helps a bit too when you're thinking about mailing. Now, there's enough looseness in this that I can slide it. If I want it to be in the center, I can make it the center. If I want to make it over here, I can make it over here. I think because I've got some of that starburst on this part of the card, I'm going to make my bow a little bit over to the left. And I'm just going to pull that snug. If you like, you can slip a glue dot underneath this knot to kind of hold your ribbon in place. I don't generally do that, but I know sometimes my class attendees like to do that, so that's a tip for just making sure that it stays in one spot. And then I'm going to put this on the card front with dimensionals as soon as I find where my dimensional sheets went to. These are things I always keep right here at my work table so that I have them handy, and I still end up losing them for some reason. So I have a brand new fresh pack I'll open up here. And use my trusty take a pick tool. Oh, that one wants to stick in there. And to my finger. Okay. So because this is, well, it's not coming out very well for me. Because this is a fairly large piece of cardstock, I am pretty liberal with my dimensionals because I don't want it working loose, for one thing. And I also don't want it to sag in the center. If you've ever done a really big piece of cardstock and you're using dimensionals and you're only putting it on the four corners, I don't know if you ever notice, but it sometimes kind of dips in the center because there's nothing there to hold it up. So as I said, I'm pretty liberal with the amount that I put on. Let me just peel my backings off. My husband always jokes because these little backings to dimensionals can be found in any room in our house at any given time. They stick to my clothes. I leave my room, go out, walk around, and tend to leave them all over the house. So last but not least is our bling, and our holiday rhinestones, basic rhinestones, is a great set of rhinestones to use with these colors because you've got the red, the gold, and the blue in here. So I'm going to, actually I've got some leftovers from another package that I had open, so I'm going to try to use these before I open up another brand new pack. And so since I have a lot more blue than anything else, I'm going to go ahead and attach a few rhinestones to this. And if you've watched any of my videos, you know I always talk about you always want to put an odd number of embellishments on your card because your eye is drawn more naturally to odd numbers than they are even. And then you also want to kind of put it in a triangle type of a design, again, because the way your eye flows around anything it's looking at, it just is more pleasing to see something in that shape. So that's it. That is how quick that can go together. And as I said, if you're working with our mask and you're using them for backgrounds, it's probably always best to do a couple of backgrounds at a time while you have everything out and you've got the mask taped down. Again, work smarter and save yourself from time for the next time you might want to do a card with that kind of background. Remember the tip of making your block a bit of a palette. So just put your ink on the block, and then this just will wash right off, wipe right off with water or just a wet wipe. And the other tip I shared was about our blending brushes, to kind of designate a brush for a certain color family. And the thing I did not show you was when you're done with your project, to clean this off, I really just kind of brush it around on my scratch pad, and you'll see some of the blues coming off. Okay, and then I just keep doing that until it gets very, very faint. And if I've worked on a project where I've used it for a number of cards and then I know I'm going to be done with that project for a while, I will just run this under water and maybe just a tiny bit of a mild dish detergent and just kind of rub it through there and get as much ink out as you can, and then set this aside and let it dry. You have to let it dry for at least overnight because these bristles are so dense. You want to give it plenty of time to dry. So that is my card for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll try our decorative mask out on some other projects. I will have an upcoming video that shows you how to use our embossing paste and our mask as well, and that's a really neat effect too if you haven't tried that before. So stay tuned, keep your eyes out for that, because hopefully I'll have one of those in the next week or so. All right, thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.